Welcome to Dealing with Stress During COVID-19 Ways to Success. It is my privilege to introduce you to today's facilitator, Reynald Borham, who is an international facilitator, speaker, and coach. He has been with MCA Training International for over 12 years now and is the regional manager for East and West Africa. Reynald has trained managers and delegates from big organizations to small companies and has facilitated workshops in multiple countries and is also the creator of the Steps to Success for Teens program. So without further ado, Reno, welcome and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Grant. I hope you all can hear me fine, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited and I'm really privileged and honored to be able to share this program and this webinar with you. It's something that I think can really help you, especially at this time. I think many people are dealing with stress and feeling extremely stressful at this time with the COVID-19 pandemic that we are faced. And this webinar today is basically just to show you how you can use that stress in a good, positive, and motivational way, because many people see stress as a negative thing, which we're going to talk about, but it can also be used in a good, positive, effective way for our lives. And this is what this webinar is about, and it's to help us realize that. So, Dr. Hans Serler said the following: "It is not stress that kills us, it is our reaction to it." So as I said, we know that stress is is a major, many diseases in the world today are caused by stress, and it's a big killer in the world today. And it's not the stress that kills us, it's the way we cope with that stress and how we react to that stress. And that's what Dr. Hans Serler is talking about here. So what is stress then? Well, the definition of stress is anything that stimulates you and increases your levels of alertness. So when we think about it in this way, it doesn't really sound that bad. Stress is something that can increase your level of alertness, that can really make you feel more aware of what you're doing, and can to push you to achieve more and to think differently and to think out of the box, which is really, really important, especially at this time when people are having to change the way they do business and the way that they basically run their lives at the moment. So one important thing that we need to realize is that stress is not always a negative experience. And that's, I think, is a lot of people's mindset. When we talk about stress, straight away, our minds think of something negative, but it's not always the case. Stress is also very personal. So what increases or what causes myself stress in my life can be very different to what causes stress in your life. It all depends on how I react to that. And we react to different things in different ways. So it will cause stress in different ways in our lives. And then also stress only becomes a problem when our resources and coping mechanisms cannot manage the degree of stress being thrown at us. So in other words, as Dr. Hans Serler was talking about earlier in the previous slides that I showed you, is that stress is only a problem when we don't know how to cope with that, when we actually allow that stress to just take over and to become just out of control. And that's when it becomes really dangerous. So we're going to look at ways to help us to cope with that stress and to perhaps not to exaggerate it in our minds and not to let it get blown out of proportion, which tends to happen quite often. And that's when it starts to really become dangerous and unpleasant for us. So we have different types of reactions to stress. A normal reaction is simply a heightened awareness and an increase in productivity, as we've mentioned. But an abnormal and unhealthy reaction is as follows. The first is one that causes physical symptoms. So stress stimulates the adrenal glands to pump large doses of adrenaline into the body. The adrenaline that is pumped into the body causes an increase in your heart and breathing rates. It also causes gastric disturbances and increases perspiration. So that's why you can find some people might get the type of side effects that they don't really want because of that. Next, adrenaline raises anxiety levels, and this causes tightness in the chest area. And this tightness causes pain and raises concerns about a heart attack. Panic attacks may also occur due to the fear of dying or simply over losing control. So then we start to not breathe properly, we forget how to breathe all of a sudden, and this is what starts to happen. So anxiety raises your blood pressure, and this causes headaches and visual problems, which people sometimes experience through stress. And then generalized anxiety interrupts sleep and eating patterns, which in turn lowers your energy levels and the body's immune system. It is a well-known empirical fact that 80% of diseases are initiated by stress. And this is because, as we said, people do not always know how to cope with it, and our coping mechanisms of these heightened levels of awareness, it causes these symptoms physically. But not only physically, the next type of reaction or abnormal reaction that we have is the psychological symptoms. This is when stress triggers a whole host of thoughts that will be specific to individuals. However, the general debilitating reactions are, first, anger. So we get angry really quickly, which I'm sure some of us can relate to this one. Next, impatience, another big one. So when we're stressed on the roads and or so on, we get a little bit impatient and we don't want to allow people in. Negativity, which leads to depression. So constant negativity, which eventually does lead to depression. Irrational thinking. So we're not seeing things clearly and we're not making clear decisions and rational decisions. Fear and loss of confidence, which is another big one. And then lastly, concentration and memory problems. So this is also a huge problem and something that, you know, we, especially at this time, and we really need to concentrate and think of how we're going to do our business and how we're going to do things differently. If we're not thinking clearly, if we can't concentrate and so on, it's really going to cause some problems for us. So it's really, really important that we learn how to deal with the stress and then to use the stress in a positive way. So the sources of stress, there are 4 different sources of stress. So 4 different ways where our stress comes from. The first one is survival stress. So this is obviously when we're faced with our well-being, our physical and healthy well-being. So this is one of the stresses that is being caused by this COVID-19 pandemic. People are starting to get worried about how they're going to stay healthy. We obviously been told that if we go out, especially here in South Africa, we've been told by our president that if we go out, we need to wear masks, we need to sanitize, we need to wash our hands all the time. And it does cause a lot of stress because we're trying to look after our physical well-being, and we have this new threat to our physical well-being causing the stress in our lives. The next source of stress is internally generated stress. So this is coming from within, from our own thoughts. As I said, sometimes as human beings, we tend to blow things out of proportion. And so that makes the problems perhaps seem a lot bigger than what it actually is. So when we start to think clearly and we start to see the problem for what it really is, we can actually start to hone it down. And it actually doesn't seem as bad as perhaps what we thought it was before. Next, our environmental or job stress. So again, this is another one that could be caused from the environment and the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. So it's very different. We're having to change, and that causes a lot of stress for people, and they're not too sure how to change and so on. And then the last one is fatigue and overwork. So when we just push ourselves beyond breaking points, in other words, we push ourselves to what we call burnout, and that's very, very dangerous. And that's when we start to really find those physical symptoms that I was talking about earlier, when we start to have those problems of fatigue and memory loss and concentration problems, and where we get those panic attacks and depression and all those sorts of things. So these are where the sources of our stress. So something that I want to share with you now, this is I'm sure some of you might have heard this quote before, but this is leading us nicely into the next part on how we can start to use the stress effectively and how to cope with the stress, which says, while we cannot direct the wind, we can adjust the sails. So what we're talking about here is basically, we're talking about, are we going to act or be acted upon? It is truly the question that reflects our position, hope, proactivity, and overall well-being. So essentially what we're talking about is that no matter what, we cannot change the direction of wind or the direction that the wind is blowing. That's out of our hands. But so often we worry about that and we allow that to cause unnecessary stress in our lives. But what you do have the power of, or what you do have control over, is how you set your sail according to that wind. So yes, we've been thrust into this situation at the moment where we really didn't have much control over that. It was out of our hands. So there's not much we can do about that, about being in the situation. But what you can do is, what are you going to do about it? You've been dealt a deck or a hand of cards in this game of life. What are you going to do with that hand? Are you going to make the best out of it? Or are you just going to say, well, there's nothing I can do, and just start making all the excuses? Because when we can start to be proactive, and when we can start to, as I mentioned before, to think out of the box, to do things differently, that's when we start to take the power and the responsibility in our lives. And that's when we allow ourselves to make the difference. And when we start taking that control and so on, we start to feel good about ourselves. And we don't start to feel all those negative connotations that perhaps we put upon ourselves, and those negative thoughts that we put upon ourselves because we feel, well, there's not much I can do, oh, always me, and so on. Are you going to act, or are you going to be acted upon? So if we want to be in control, it is possible to have control and confidence if you are subjected helplessly to your stresses. We are in such case being acted upon by the elements of the environment and our interpretation of it. So in addition, we adapt a blame mentality, and this furthers the impact of our stress. So now we're saying, well, there's not much I can do. All of these things are happening to me. Oh, always me. And that's when we start to create what we call that blame mentality. In other words, I'm the victim here. There's not much I can do. In contrast, by accepting full responsibility, as I just mentioned, and taking action, we empower ourselves. We begin, in effect, to empower those weaknesses we have in turning them into strengths. We assume the role of a proactive individual and become a powerful influence on all around us. You see the difference here? Instead of being the victim and saying, well, there's nothing I can do and so on, now we are taking control. We are taking that responsibility. You are giving yourself the opportunity to make a difference, not just to yourselves, but to everyone around you. And this is what we really need, especially at this time. We need people who are going to make those differences, who are going to lead the rest of us through this time, that are going to show us the way that we can get through this, because we are going to get through this, and we will get through this. But it is up to us, those individuals who are willing to take control and to act, that will make the difference and will show the way for the others into the light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of this pandemic. So why does stress, or how can we make stress motivate us? How can it be that good, positive force in our lives? Well, this is how we can do that. Remember, as I've mentioned earlier, stress is simply anything that stimulates you and increases your level of alertness. Remember that. So the effects of stress range from irritability and anxiety to raised blood pressure and heart disease, as we mentioned earlier in the physical symptoms. So when you think of stress in these terms, it's no wonder you spend so much time trying to manage or avoid it altogether. On the other hand, what if instead of stressing over how to rid your life of stress, you focused on ways to use it to your advantage? So what we're talking about here is to change your mindset, change your perception of how you see stress. So what would happen if you perceive stress as a helpful companion with benefits to offer rather than as an irritating foe out to make your life harder? So instead of seeing it as this negative thing, see it as a positive thing that can really make a difference in your life. And when you change that mindset, it really makes a huge difference in your life. Now you're not trying to avoid it. You're using the stress that is going to come into your lives, whether you're trying to avoid it or not. And that's the funny thing. Even when you try to avoid it, it's still going to be there. Instead of trying to avoid it, use that stress that is going to come into your life in an effective, positive way. So Dr. Kelly McGonigal describes in her book, The Upside of Stress, it is this shift in mindset that allows you to have a healthy relationship with stress. So my friends, we need to, and you have to be honest with yourself, do you need to change your mindset and perhaps see stress differently, because it can really help you and you can use it as a driving force in your life. So here are the benefits of stress. The first one is that it can be motivating action. It can motivate you to act. So whether it's landing a new job promotion, meeting a deadline, or tackling a to-do list, a little stress can push you to take action. If you didn't feel any stress at all, you might not feel inclined to break out of your comfort zone, which is essential for personal growth. And I think this is happening for a lot of people, is that now, because we've been pushed into this pandemic, we're having to think differently and to do our businesses differently. So it's pushing people to act differently and to change the way that they are doing business. So when we start to understand that, hey, this is actually a benefit of stress, it's going to change our mindset and change the way that we see stress. And then it's not going to create all those negative symptoms that we spoke about earlier. We're not going to see it causing those things for us. Instead, it's going to be a powerful, uplifting thought for us, and then it's going to lead to greater things in the future. The second benefit of success is it builds resiliency. So when you experience small amounts of stress, you're actually building up your resistance to future stresses. According to the American Psychological Association, over time, humans are wired to adapt to stressful situations by building resilience, which can be developed by making connections with others, taking care of yourself, and taking decisive actions. So my friends, at the end of this pandemic, and if you are willing to do what it takes and you get through this, doing whatever you can, building yourself up, strengthening yourself, growing yourself, you're going to see that this will build resiliency. You're going to be a better person for it. And this is another benefit of stress. The third benefit is that it boosts cognitive function. A 2013 study from the University of California in Berkeley found that acute stress can generate new nerve cells in the brain, improving cognitive and mental performance. According to the authors of the study, a certain amount of stress can promote optimal levels of focus, improve memory, and enhance learning of new tasks. Now, I don't know about you, but this is definitely something that I can always use to help boost my cognitive function. My wife always tells me that I can always do better with expanding my mind. This is a wonderful benefit of stress that we can use to boost our cognitive function. What a wonderful thing. So how to make stress work for you? Firstly, we need to retrain your brain. So replace the negative thoughts that typically arise at the first sign of stress with more positive ones, such as, I'm experiencing stress, and welcome it fully. Then think of how you could best use it to solve a problem or reach a goal. How can you make the stress work for you? In other words, changing our mindsets, changing our perception of that. And it's going to take some time. So each time you think, how can I make this work for me? And after time, you will start to see that instead of straight away going to that negative feeling when you think about stress, you'll start to see it more positively as you go along. So a huge tip is also, remember, don't stress over trying to think of a way to best use stress as well. Okay, that's not going to help in any way. The next way that you can help to make stress work for you is to reframe your perspective. So when you attach purpose to a difficult situation, it becomes easier to handle, or at the very least, motivates you to handle it. When you reframe stresses in order to add meaning to your life, you're giving your stress a positive purpose. Pairing stress with a purpose will allow you to broaden your perspective as to why it exists and the benefits it provides. But a lot of us, we're going through life without even having a purpose, or without even having that why, as Simon Sinek says. We need to find our why, our purpose. And when we can reframe our perspective, and when we can try and use the stress that we are getting in our lives, remember what stress is? It's a heightened level of alertness. To accomplish that purpose, again, we will see it as a positive driving force in our lives. Next, how we can make stress work for us is to ask why. Sometimes you feel stressed and can easily identify the cause. Other times you're unsure where it stems from. Pinpointing the root cause of your stress puts you in a position to work with it rather than against it. So how can we manage stress with goals? Because this is a great way to manage our stress. Setting goals for your life can help you manage and reduce your stress for the following reasons. Firstly, you always know where you are going and therefore feel little fear of the unknown. So it gives you that direction in your life when you set goals for your life. Next, obstacles are not perceived as threats because you have anticipated them and planned how you will handle them. And thirdly, making choices is simplified because your goals serve as the criteria for making those choices. So you reduce a lot of the stress that might come into your life because you are more organized, you have a sense of direction, you know where you are going, you know what choices you need to make. And this will really, really benefit you in a huge way. So remember, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, happiness is the progressive realization of a worthy goal. The more happiness you feel, the less stressed you're going to feel in your life. And B.F. Skinner, the American psychologist, he had the following maxim where he said, control your conditions and you will see order. These are all benefits of setting those goals in your life. Alfred Adler maintained that the greatest problem in human life is to develop a lifestyle around healthy work, love, marital, family, and other interpersonal relationships. So a healthier lifestyle is something we all desire and can achieve. In taking control, we are going to discuss how to cope with a few relevant issues of living, relaxation techniques, and adjusting your lifestyle now. So how can we do that? So the first thing, how can we cope with failure? Because failure is going to come into our lives. So how can we cope with that failure? Well, no one can chance and effort and win all the time. It is not whether people fail that determines the success, but how they cope with that failure. I always like to say that failure is the stepping stones to success. So it's not, are we going to use that failure as an obstacle or a stop to our success, or are we going to learn from those failures? And so many people who have become great successes in their lives and in the world, and all those people, the Richard Bransons and so on that we hear of, they have failed their way to their success. Next, how can we cope with smoking, alcohol, and other harmful drugs? So there are no healthy merits in the above practices. There are a few reasons why people engage in the above. First, the pleasure they attach to it, so the image, the social acceptance, all those sorts of things. Second, it's habit forming, so they depend on it a little bit because now it's part of their lives, and you know that if they go a few days without it, they start to have those withdrawals and so on. And then thirdly, it's a means of escape, so relaxation, tension, reduction, to escape from the stress and all those sorts of things. They see it as a means of escape. But it's not always that. So we suggest the following process for kicking the habit then. Next, ask yourself, why do you practice the habit? Very important. Be completely honest. Why do you practice these habits or the habit? Next, do you desire to live the law of health? And how important is it to you? And thirdly, how can you develop a strong enough reason to quit? What rewards and pleasures will you attach to it? So is it really necessary? Can you get to a point where you can cope without these harmful drugs in your life and these addictions in your life? Because they are going to add more stress to you. I know a lot of people here during this pandemic, Obviously, they're not allowed to buy their tobacco and their alcohol and so on, and they're really they're really stressing over it. So how important is it to you to have these things in your life, and how important is it to you to live a healthy lifestyle? And you need to ask yourselves these questions and be completely honest with yourself. And how will you measure and monitor this process? Third, how are you going to cope with traveling? So this is another huge thing that causes stress in our lives. So there are many factors that cause stress when we are driving. So the noise and vibration around us and so on. I know myself, when I'm trying to drive and I need directions and so on, I turn down the radio. For some reason, I need to turn down the music to understand exactly where I'm going. So that can cause a little bit of stress and so on. Next, the traffic frustration. This is a huge one. When we're stuck in traffic, it really causes a lot of stress for us. The behavior of other passengers, so the backseat drivers and so on, they can cause us a lot of stress, and how we react to that can cause us a lot of stress. So rush hour drivers experience marked rises in heart rate, blood pressure, sweaty palms, and irritability because of these things. So passengers will experience major stress if late for an appointment because they are not in control of getting to their destination any quicker. But remember, my friends, we need to remember there are some things that we are not in control of. We are not in control of whether there's traffic or not. We are not in control of what other people are doing. The only thing of what we are in control of is how do we react to those things. I'll never forget that I was driving down the road with my wife in the car one day, and there was a taxi here in South Africa, and I know a lot of taxis around the world are pretty much the same, and he just swerved right in front of me, and I wasn't very happy, and I said a few words in a heated exchange towards him. And my wife just told me, well, what is the point of that? What are you benefiting from that? You know, what is it going to make a difference? And when I was completely honest with myself, I realized that it really isn't going to make a difference and really isn't going to benefit anything. If anything, it's actually making me feel worse. So I've made the decision to not let those things bother me, and it's made driving a lot more pleasant when I'm on the roads. Next, coping with sleep. So if we can manage our stresses, we will have a better night's sleep, which is very, very important. So some things we can do to cope: follow a gradual winding down method, and may follow a hot bath, a warm drink, or a short period of reading. So just wind down and to relax ourselves and so on before we go to sleep. Next, regular exercise is a great way to get us into a good pattern. And because I'll talk about a little bit about it later, but it releases serotonin, which is the happiness chemical, and so on. And then it's just allows us to get into the right frame of mind to have a better night's sleep as well. Because when we're feeling overstressed and we're feeling worried and all those sorts of things, it's a lot harder to fall asleep. But as we feel happier and as we feel more joyful and at ease, it's a lot easier to fall asleep. Next, very important, get up earlier. That's a very, very good suggestion. So a lot of times, I know a lot of people, they get up late, whoever that may be, I won't name names, but they get up late and then they obviously fall asleep a lot later and they find it a lot harder to fall asleep. I found when I've started to get up earlier in the mornings, it's a lot easier for me to fall asleep at a more reasonable hour. Keep warm, very, very important, especially when it's cold out. And for us in South Africa, we're getting into our winter period. We have a very cold day here in Durban, South Africa. I know if I keep myself warm, it'll be a lot easier to go to sleep. And then again, drink a glass of milk. Milk contains tryptophan, a substance that promotes sleep, okay, which is very, very important. And then the next one is coping with a crisis, which in a way we're finding ourselves right now with this COVID-19 pandemic. So it is important to work out what your role will be in a crisis. So here are a few suggestions in handling a crisis. Next, communicate your anxiety. Words such as calm down, it's all right, have relieving effects on our state of mind. So don't, as Dave has mentioned in our previous webinars, because of the hype and the hysteria that has been communicated, especially from the media at this time, it causes us to feel anxious and to create this pandemic and to make it a lot bigger than perhaps what it really needs to be. Not saying that it's not a big deal, but it is being blown out of proportion. So we need to really say, okay, it's okay. We're going to make it through. It's going to be all right. If we just follow the recommendations from the professional health practitioners, we will be okay. And that will reduce our stress significantly and our ability to cope with this crisis significantly. Next, focus on what ought to be done, not why is this happening to me. So again, are you going to be acted upon or are you going to act? What can you do through this? How can you make it out of this pandemic? Next, seek advice. There's nothing wrong with that. So whether you feel that you need to seek advice from professionals, from counselors, whatever it may be, from someone that you trust, don't be scared to seek that advice, because it can really, really help you to cope with that crisis. They can give you words of wisdom and the things that you really perhaps need to hear, that perhaps you weren't honest with yourself enough to be aware of that, or you weren't really aware of the things that you need to do to cope with this. Next, talking and listening. So talk about it. Don't keep your feelings inside of you. I know that's something that some of us do struggle with, to just talk about how we are feeling. But as we do that, it allows us to release a lot of the stress that builds up if we don't talk about it and we don't let our feelings and our thoughts known to other people. And also to listen to others, because as we listen to others, we might get good ideas ourselves. Another good thing for you, if this is something that you believe in, is to seek religious or spiritual help, just to find, just to feel a bit more zen and a bit more in control, and just to get that balance in your life, which is really, really important. And that can really help you to deal with a crisis. And then look for the positives. This is something that I've been saying a lot on my daily videos that we post to our MCA Executive Club, is that no matter what situation you are going through, there is always a silver lining. You can always find the positives. So even in this situation, yes, it sucks. Yes, it's not really nice, but there's always positives. We're having to think differently. We're having to do our business differently. What a wonderful opportunity to grow and to strengthen ourselves. So there's always positives, no matter what situation you are in, and you will find them. Look for them, and that will help you to cope with these types of situations. Next, relaxation techniques, which are very, very important in coping with stress, is that the purpose of relaxation is to help you feel more refreshed and at ease with your conditions. Some forms of relaxation are active, while others are passive. Either way, we all need to sharpen the saw, as Stephen R. Covey says, and experience renewal and leisure. So what are some of these techniques that we can do in our lives? Well, firstly, as I mentioned before, physical exercise, whatever it may be. Okay, it's a little bit more restrictive with, like in South Africa with the lockdowns, but we can always do different types of exercise. So walk on the treadmill, yoga, stretching exercises, whatever it may be. Very, very important. 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes 3 times a week will really help you manage that stress and so on, and to cope with that. Next, to eat correctly. So to eat healthily, I know that a lot of the time when I know a lot of people that in this pandemic and so on, being forced to stay home, that they're talking about a lot how they're stress eating and perhaps not eating the correct things. But when we eat correctly and we eat the right things, it can really help us to manage the stress and to relax ourselves and to create a healthier lifestyle, which is very, very important when coping with stress. Next, to anticipation and avoidance. So what are the things we need to anticipate, the things that can come into our life? So we know what situation we are in. We know the situation that the COVID-19 pandemic has put us in. What are the things that are going to come into our lives? We know that in South Africa, we've been told that there's going to be different levels of lockdown and so on. And we've been told which each level entails. So how can we prepare ourselves for each of those levels and so on? And what can we do? What are we going to do when that level is enforced? And how are we going to cope with that? Next, as I've mentioned, being in control of your life, to accept that responsibility, to act, to set the sail to the wind and to allow yourself to go in that direction that you choose. Next, time management, which is very, very important. So not allowing ourselves to waste our time. So this is what can, if we do not manage our time effectively, this is what can lead to that burnout and that fatigue and overwork that I mentioned before. So manage your time effectively. Next, keep things in perspective. This is a huge one. As I said, the media are blowing things out of proportion. So keep things in perspective and see things for what they really are, and this will really help in a big way. Next, rational and positive thinking. So see things clearly. Make rational thoughts in this time. Do not allow your, what we call the reptilian brain, to take over and just get into that fight or flight mode. See things for what they really are. Use your cognitive brain. You have that ability as a human being, and see things for what they really need to be and can be and what they really are. Very, very important. Next, problem solving. So something that I read today is that the most successful people in the world spend 10% of their time on the problems and 90% of their time on the solutions. So when we don't dwell on the problem too much, but how are we going to overcome this problem, the solution, you'll find that your stress will decrease because of that, because you are now focusing on the positive thing, the solution, how you're going to overcome that. And that's a very powerful tool. As I mentioned before, sleeping, we need to get our sleep. That we recommended about 8 hours or so on average, but 6 to 8 hours is more than enough. We need to get a good night's sleep because it allows us then the next day to think well, to have 100%, or to have a sharper cognitive function and so on. Very, very important. Next, social engagement. Okay, this is obviously a lot harder in lockdowns and all those sorts of things, but we've still got things like Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp calling and video calling. We live in a global village, so we're still able to get some degree of social engagement, and that's very, very important, and that allows us to relax, to being in the presence of our loved ones and so on. Very, very important. And then lastly, just learn to breathe. Take a deep breath in and not allow things to worry you too much. Very, very important. So my friends, I hope this has helped you to know and understand how you can use stress in a more positive way in coping with where we find ourselves in a very stressful situation. But again, we'd just like to remind you as well of our MCA Executive Club, where it's a club that we have designed to help people to develop themselves, especially leaders and so on. So that's in order to do that, we go in this executive club, we do monthly webinars. We have our training courses all online there that you can access. You have access to our training videos and so on that we put up there, our daily and weekly training videos that we put up there, all the things that we feel that we need to share with you. It's a wonderful tool if you are really serious about developing yourself as a leader. Because remember, this is a journey, and we want to help you along this journey and to help you and guide you along this journey. And that's what the purpose of the MCA Executive Club is for. So if you want to know more about this, please, again, just put your email address in the chat box that Grant was talking about earlier, and we can send you some more information as well. But everyone, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I hope this has benefited you. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I've been able to share my thoughts on how you can use stress in a positive way through this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Reynold, for that very informative webinar and presentation. And I'm sure there's a lot that everybody is able to take away and that we're able to start implementing immediately into our lives. For everybody that's that has been a part of this webinar, thank you very much. We just want to invite, if you have any questions now, please type them into the chat box below. We do have one question which I'll get to in a minute. So if you have any questions, just type that in right now, and then Ren will get to them. And then also, if you're interested in the MCA Executive Club, then please type in your email address and we can send you more information on that. And then also, if you'd like a copy of the recording of this webinar sent to you, then also please let us know in the chat box your email address and then also your interest in the recording. So thank you very much, everyone. So Reynor, we do have one question here so far from Charmaine. She wants to know
Sure.
if you could please share some specifics that we can do to stay positive.
Yeah, that's a great, great question. There's a few things that we can do to stay positive, especially at this time when there's so much negativity going around. I think that's a huge problem in the world today. There's so many things that we could do to remain positive. As I mentioned, we need to see things clearly for what they really are. So in other words, what I mean by that is to not allow yourself to get carried away by the hysteria and so on. And I know that's quite a difficult thing to do. Well, what are good news sources and all those sorts of things, but really listen to yourself. I think something that's very important is to just listen to yourself and really think, is this really what it is? There's so many times when I've been faced with stories and I get sent things from people on WhatsApp and so on, and I think to myself, is that really the situation that we find ourselves in? Because I don't find that a lot of the time. I find that things, even though it is a very difficult situation, it's not as bad as it has been perceived by the media. So I think that's something that we have to be very careful, is to take with a pinch of salt what the media are saying. Next things that we can do, something that I can tell you what I've been doing personally myself is I like to follow a lot of things online like Goalcast and TED Talks and those sorts of things, because those are positive, powerful, uplifting sources of media that we can use to really uplift ourselves and so on. And that's something that really allows me to get my day started on a good, positive note. So I always look at the quotes that they share and those sorts of things, maybe listen to a TED Talk and so on. And that's something that has really helped me to really start my day off on a good note. Reading good, inspiring, self-help books and so on is another great way to just bring that positivity into our lives. The thing is, if we want positivity in our lives, it's our responsibility. The negativity just comes into our laps. It just falls into us. We don't have to look far for the negativity. But if you want those positive things, you have to act upon that. You have to take the responsibility. You have to bring that positivity into your life. And if you want that, you can find it out there. There's so many sources for that positivity. But those are just a few of the things that I've been doing myself personally to just start my day off on a good positive note. And I hope that that has helped you as well, just to give you those few suggestions.
Thank you very much, Reynor, for answering that question. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions for now. So I just want to say thanks again, Reynor, for your time. Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you everyone for attending and for giving of your time.